Hello everyone, my name is Dan and I make competitive Warhammer 40k content. Today's going to be a little different. We actually got a massive announcement by Warhammer community on one of their Twitch streams about the new Warhammer 40k primaries and secondary scoring systems. They're really awesome. I think it's a lot of positive changes and also some medium changes. So what I'd like to do is go over some of the new primary and missions we have, as well as go over some of the edited secondaries. Of course, there's going to be many more in the future, but what I'd like to talk about is some of the design changes that Games Workshop is doing and kind of how that's taking us in a much more positive direction. My philosophy is if you can't make a balanced game, at least make a dynamic game. I think for the last 2 years, the missions as well as the secondaries have been pretty stagnant, and only about maybe 10% of the secondaries were even playable. And I'm glad that we're going to see hopefully a kind of a bump in a direction where we can have more viable secondaries and a more interesting mission. As always, if you want to see more of these videos, please consider liking or subscribing, as well as possibly supporting me on my Patreon. So we were given two different primary missions as well as two different edited secondaries. So the first mission we're going to be going over is new priority targets. So across all missions, every single mission specific secondary has been taken out and instead folded into the primary system of that mission. And what they've done is they've actually reduced the amount of points you score by standing on objectives and then added a kind of a tertiary or a bonus way of making up those last points. So for example, now in priority targets, instead of scoring 5, 10, 15 for holding 1, 2, or more, you now score 4, 8, or 12 at the beginning of your turn based on how many objectives you hold. Now, if you remember, priority targets is the mission where both players will actually move different objectives, and then each player will pick one objective in their half of the table and call that their priority objective. So in the new priority targets, you score 3 VP at the beginning of your turn for primaries if you hold that priority objective in your half of the board. One thing I always found really frustrating about old GW missions is that certain missions had incredibly good auto-take mission-specific secondaries, and the other ones were totally unplayable and complete trash. And then every mission only felt slightly different because of the deployment zones and the number of objectives. But those are actually kind of like really minor differences, and they all kind of felt like they played out very similarly. So in this case, what they're actually doing is they're making it so every mission has a specific tertiary that must be played, and that adds a kind of a new replayability to the missions. The next mission we saw previewed is the new version of Retrieval Mission. It has the same type of new scoring where it's hold 1, 2, or more for 4, 8, or 12 points. However, the tertiary for Retrieval Mission is that you get 1 VP per unit of your opponents that you've killed at the end of the turn, and that's a max of 3 points per turn. Additionally, you have to hold one of the 4 midfield objectives to be able to get command points at the beginning of your turn. And additionally, you get an extra command point per turn if you hold your opponent's objective in their deployment zone. So first off, for the tertiary of this mission, I don't totally love because I don't like the idea of primaries being tied to killing. So I don't know if I totally love this as a part of the primary mission, although I do like that it does add some variety to the missions, just like the previous one. I feel like the holding one of the 4 midfield objectives to get CP is incredibly safe because of the amount of objectives in the center. There's 4 of them. I think it's so easy to get that it seems like it's almost basically not really something you have to worry about. And the extra CP if you're holding your opponent's objective is cool, and hopefully that adds for some extra counterplay. I like how they're tying command points into this. I would really like some missions to give you an opportunity to spend command points, or maybe some mission-specific stratagems that are also added, but we don't see any of those yet. So overall, I definitely like the depth that both of these missions add, but they do feel a little bit safe, and I hope they continue to push the envelope with some of their missions in the future. I don't just want old missions with a twist, I want entirely new missions. Okay, one of the new secondaries that was previewed is No Prisoners. It's essentially exactly the same as the old No Prisoners, which I've put a kind of a description of on the screen here. The only difference is that they're giving you an additional VP if you're scoring between 50 and 99 kill points, and then additional 2 CP instead if you're over 100. So as many of you know, if you've watched my secondaries guide video before, that there are certain secondaries that are picked and a vast majority of secondaries that are never picked. And I think what we need to do is bump up those not taken secondaries ever so slightly. And I think this is a good kind of test to see, hey, can we get no prisoners to be playable? And getting an additional few VP for it is a step in the right direction. Still, this is a little safe, and it essentially is the same secondary as before. I'm still not sure if we're going to see a whole lot of play with this, but it is nice that they're adding benefits. You know, Games Workshop talked about having more balanced updates for actual rule sets every 3 months or every quarter instead of the kind of yearly updates they were doing in the past. I would really like to see secondaries being updated on a quarterly basis as well, because what I think we'll see is that no prisoners will still not be very good, and maybe they can bump it up by additional VP or 2, and that way we don't spend a year with a useless secondary. The third secondary is Retrieve Nachmund data, which is the kind of a new version of Retrieve Octarius data. And these are some really positive changes, so I want to spend a little bit of time on this. So essentially what they've done is they've changed Retrieve Octarius data to not only allow for infantry models, but also characters and bikers. And one addition they put to this rule, which I really like, is that you roll a d6, subtracting 1 if the unit is a troop model, and if the result is less than or equal to the number of models currently in that unit, you essentially score the Retrieve Octarius data of that corner. So for example, let's say you have a unit of 5 incursors in one of your opponent's corners. You roll a d6 and get a 6. You subtract 1 because they're troops, and because you have 5 or more in the unit, you essentially score that corner. So now there's an actual benefit to having troops for secondary actions. In other words, a 5-man troop will automatically score the Retrieve Nachmund data, whereas you would need a 6-person unit of an elite unit slot to automatically score the Retrieve Nachmund data. And this is really good because I think Games Workshop has a huge flaw in troop design, where essentially they force you to take troops, they try to make them useful by giving them OBSEC, but they give so many other things OBSEC too that it ends up feeling like troops are just a kind of a waste. And what I'd like to see is more opportunities for troops to be useful. Essentially what your opponent could do is have this Lictor, which is like a 27-point model for Tyranids, that is a medium-sized, 40 mil base. It would deep strike into your backfield, which is incredibly hard to screen. It would do Retrieve Octarius data, and you could essentially not stop it. So that means if you're a Lictor and you're dropping down, you would have to roll a 1 on a d6 to be able to score that Retrieve Octarius data. So I really like how they're pushing us away from these single, elites deep striking for essentially no points and scoring Retrieve Octarius data to instead kind of incentivizing and pushing us to take troops. I would like much more secondaries to require or give benefits for using troops. Right now, I feel like there's a huge issue with troops in Warhammer 40k, and they feel bad to take. And I don't like having to pay for units that feel bad. I want units that give me benefits and feel like they're actually achieving something in game. So my question for you is, do you like the new secondaries? Do you think we should be pushing more towards troops, or do you kind of prefer how we were in the past? Additionally, I'd like to hear what your opinions on the primaries are and the new kind of tertiary point scoring we have. Honestly, what I would have preferred is if you just took away the painting score and just had the tertiary be a max of 10 points you could score, and then just make painting mandatory in tournaments, but that's just me. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoyed the video.